From Washington and Philadelphia to New York and Boston, the comfortable middle class and the rich moved north, filling daily trains and coastal steamers. Over the new-laid roadbed of the Maine Shoreline Railroad, they arrived at its northern terminus of Hancock, Maine. Others sailed down east from Boston Harbor, along the coast to Hancock's Mount Desert Ferry Terminal beside the railroad station. From there, most continued by ferry across the 8 miles of Frenchman's Bay to Mount Desert Island and Bar Harbor, to their cottages, and to them, the simple, rustic life. But, little by little, some chose to stay, establishing a small summer colony on Hancock Point.
My first arrival here was with my mother, father, and sister and brother, and we came on the Bar Harbor Express. The Bar Harbor Express was one of the country's most elegant crack express trains. At the time I took it, we took it from New York City. Later on, it originated with cars from Washington, picked up cars in Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and then arrived about 3 miles from where you're sitting right now at the Mount Desert Ferry. Well, we arrived about 9 in the morning, and the trip was, for a youngster like I was then, pure magic. When we arrived, the ferry boats, Rangeley and Norumbega, the steamers were at the dock. Yachts were waiting outside to pick up the more wealthy residents of Mount Desert Island. There were speedboats, Chris Craft. It was a very dramatic scene. Well, the ferry itself continued to play a key role in my life as a youngster, because with a friend of mine, my best friend here, Tyler Claverius, day after day we would get on our bicycles, ride from Hancock Point to the ferry, and then the locomotive engineers couldn't have been nicer to these nuisancey youngsters, and we rode the locomotives from morning until night and helped them on the turntable, because they had to turn around on this single track to get on their way back. Why my mother and father weren't worried about our being crushed to death, I don't know, but they didn't seem to be, and there were never any prohibitions against this great delight in our life.
A good part of the town of Hancock rests on a 5-mile-long north-south peninsula, washed by the cold waters of Frenchman's Bay. This remote place was incorporated as a town in 1828, just 8 years after Maine had detached itself from the governance of Massachusetts and had, itself, become a state. Before the mid-19th century, Hancock was a collection of scattered farms, fields, fishing, and shipping. Though beautiful, it was a remote place with little allure, as yet, for visitors. Reverend Hazelwood from Bangor was our first summer resident on the point. He built a small house on this spot in 1876, which was about 8 years before the railroad came in. He also encouraged his wealthy parishioners to come. During the remainder of the century, a few dozen non-Maine families discovered the place. These were professors from prestigious institutions. One of these early summer academics was Frederick Jackson Turner, who is one of the country's most famous historians.
Turner actually was a relatively late comer to the point. When he was teaching at the University of Wisconsin, lived next door to a Professor Slaughter, who had already come, and Slaughter received information about this because of his wife and because of their education in Eastern universities. So they, in other words, belonged to the network of college professors, some of whom had already come to Hancock Point, particularly Professor Allenson. And therefore the Slaughters did, and they bought the cottage, which was now Bob Taylor's and has just now been sold. And in 1918, the Turners visited the Slaughters. They had done that once before and fell in love with the place, and our cottage came on the market, and they bought it the following year. We have a picture of Turner holding me my first birthday, which was in 1918. Some of us are still survivors. And then he bought it the next year. So that's relatively late as the Hancock Point families go. And he then was already a part of and entered an intellectual community of considerable number of college professors. Another one was Charles Homer Haskins, who was fully as distinguished as Turner in European history, and whose family also had already come. And Turner went to Harvard from Wisconsin in 1910. So the summer residents, so-called, have been always a mixture of people who were themselves residents of Maine, together with those who were not residents of Maine. This intellectual community did not form any organization, any separate organization. They did have a place of refuge from their children, which they called Ararat, for reasons that I'm not clear about. But in any case, and that was a little cabin to which they repaired when they got sick and tired of the kids. I don't think they accomplished anything very seriously, but they just had a good time talking to one another in the community. And I can't testify at first hand to what effect the intellectual group might have had on Hancock Point and the Hancock people, so it's merely a speculation. But where you have a significant nucleus of people with intellectual interest, there's bound to be a radiation of some kind, like a point source of light. One would have the library. They would see to that, of course. And the people who would come to Hancock Point would be, therefore, the ones who were attracted by the presence of a group of men and women of this type, the presence of a library, and of the conversation and meetings and gatherings that are typical of such a group. Again, this could not have helped but influence the Maine residents, who were themselves very far from being ignorant, but were very intelligent, with education. Many of them have traveled, so we're not talking about the bringing of culture from an elite to the masses or anything like that.
Little by little, word of the colony and the charm of its surroundings spread from friends to friends of friends, and it gradually became an entrenched part of the life of a good many families.
We came in 1919, and the year before we had come for a few days on a cruise with my father to visit the Reed cottage, who were here. So we'd had a little glimpse of it before, and my father first came in 1892 with his parents when he was a freshman at Yale. So he had been here a good many years before anyway, and I'm sure to him it was exactly the same as it was in 1892. And well, anyway, we would just love being here. I will say, this is the time to say maybe about the famous remark of Harry Johnson when he was asked what kind of people were at Hancock Point. He said, well, there weren't any men here, there were just women and college professors. And my father was a professor, but we came here because of the Reeds. He was a professor, and there were, the point was at that time peopled by professors from 3 or 4 universities. And that's why we were all here for so long, because they all had 3 months. Nobody did any work in the summers in those days. They just came and enjoyed themselves.
In 1904, I came with my mother and my brother and my sister. But we came to Mount Desert Ferry and on the Bar Harbor Express, and we walked around and got on a buckboard to come to Hancock Point, which was the most fun we ever had. All the fancy people would go to Bar Harbor on it was then the Samoset boat. And that we had John Nicholas Brown, supposed to be the $1 million baby, and they always met him with a glass carriage, glass enclosed carriage, and wheeled him. Of course, we didn't care a thing about that. All we cared about getting to Hancock Point. In those days, there was very little connection between Hancock and Hancock Point. Now, in our family, the only connection we had at all was because Captain Chester lived in our house. He was the lighthouse keeper. And he had a girl named Katie, and she was our nurse when we first came. But as we grew up, all of us, just were absolutely insane about Maine. I mean, we just lived from one summer to the next.
At least 5 tracks, so that there could be freight trains and 4 other trains, passenger trains sitting here. Large freight sheds, large overhang for people getting off from the passenger trains, plus the station itself. The dock had 2 ramps, which were movable up and down to compensate for the change in tide. And then, in addition to that, at the northern end of the dock, there was a float for the convenience of the people who came in here in their private yachts. I remember one thing that was always interesting to me was when the gold was transferred in here from Crown Princess Cecily. There was a large crowd gathered here on the dock. Soldiers were here with guns and bayonets. And there used to be a large ramp that came up where you could drive up or walk. Everyone was held back behind ropes, not allowed around anywhere near this operation. And all at once, Sam Johnston, who used to carry the mails from Hancock Point to Mount Desert Ferry, walked up the ramp, started across the dock. And I was just a young kid, and I was frightened to death because the soldiers went after him with the bayonets. No, sir, he wasn't going to come here. And anyone in this town who remembered him would appreciate it because Sam walked up, "You can't stop the United States mail." And he just paraded through the soldiers, and they just backed off and left him.
Effect that this railroad had on this town of Hancock. And this was about a 4-month operation, June, July, August, September. And following the close of the railroad season, so to speak, here, most of these men were laid off. There's no unemployment, no Social Security. So if they wanted to eat, they had to get out and work and do something. And I can recall my dad cutting wood with a bucksaw and axe for $1 a cod. They were digging clams in the area, shipping them to Boston. Anything that they could do to pick up a few dollars to keep the family together. So it was an economically depressed area, and Maine Central Railroad certainly was a big factor in the economy of this section. One of our steamers, I believe it was the Norm-Baker, going from Mount Desert Ferry, this present location, to Bar Harbor, came off course for some reason, either physical error or error in the mechanism, but they found the boat high and dry on Beans Island, which was quite a newsworthy item at the time. One severe winter, the steamboat was unable to land here at this wharf, and they came as far as they could in the ice, and then they unloaded the passengers and the freight and the mail from the steamboat and brought them up to this location by horse and buggy, or horse and sled probably at that time.
The 1880s through the early part of this century was a kind of belle epoque for America. Industrial development created many fortunes and fueled the growth of a large professional class. For the well-heeled, the pace of life could be slower. Usually only the man of the family earned a living, and the new gentry had both the money and time to vacate their homes for the entire summer season. For the very wealthy, grand watering holes like Saratoga, Newport, and Bar Harbor became a regular fixture of the annual calendar. For those of somewhat more modest means, there were other summer colonies. These places were comfortable and sedate, but certainly no rivals for the flamboyant displays of the nation's fledgling industrial aristocrats. Hancock Point turned out to be one of the alternatives. It was close to Bar Harbor and served by the same rail line and steamers.
Economy during those years was shifting from a farming, dairy farming, grain growing, especially crop growing community, away. There's, of course, some fishing, lobster fishing now, but some of that gap in the economy was taken up by the favorable economic impact of this summer community. It supported, on Hancock Point itself, a store. Mina and Herbert Young had a store right near where the post office is today. A hotel, the Tarantine, another hotel, a bigger one that had disappeared by my time, at the ferry. We had a local water system that Harry Johnson ran. We had a livery stable that Sam Johnson, his father, ran. So this local community, small as it was, supported economically quite a lot of facilities. I don't know.
Comparing it with other places, there was much more normal living in Hancock Point than they would be in Northeast Harbor or Bar Harbor or Southampton or Newport or any of the so-called summer places. It was a natural, relaxed, happy life, obviously among beautiful surroundings, and with people whom we all liked and thought a lot of and loved. It was, I think this is what brought both my brother and me back here to live and retire. The memories we had of our childhood here, and the other years too, but the childhood particularly. The kind of a place it is physically, and the kind of people that are here. This is what brought us back.
I suppose that what happened on Hancock Point during the summer was pretty much the same as it was any place where people were fortunate enough to have the leisure time to pursue doing what they enjoyed. With very poor roads and no cars in the early part of the century, people here had simple pleasures. Picnics were popular. The Point's only tennis court got a good deal of use. Many of the families had boats and spent time sailing those. There were small parties and social events, and the local baseball team was vitally important to everybody. What was different was the scholarship of many of the people and the very cosmopolitan flavor that the highly educated and well-traveled summer people were able to create. The mood wasn't forced, but very natural, and it has had a lasting influence on many of the local folks. And remember, there are only about 1,400 people in the whole town of Hancock, and scarcely 100 families on Hancock Point. And yet, all these books were written by or about those people. That is an outstanding example of creative effort blended with summer leisure. That environment is bound to have an effect on the people that live in it.
My life and the lives of many of my relatives and neighbors here in Hancock are different than they might have been because of our long association with the summer people on Hancock Point. When I was a little kid growing up here, I was working here at an early age, delivering milk and eggs from my grandfather's dairy farm. Later, I helped my uncles, aunts, and my parents take care of many of the cottages. When I was a teenager, I had my own lawn mowing business, and here I am today as keeper of the books of the Hancock Point Library, where the children's wing is named in honor of my maternal grandparents. When I was a kid, I guess I wanted to be a summer person. I wanted to be like them, or like I thought they were, to go where they were from, to New York and so on, to go to college and leave Maine, which I did for 15 years. But when I look back at it, certainly the summer people gave encouragement, inspiration, and direction in my life, and also, of course, money and books and records and so on. They were very generous. Two men, especially in my lifetime, should be singled out. George Pierce, a scientist, and Lansing Hammond, a professor, both of whom gave generously of their time and money to a lot of us local kids to send us to camp in the summer, to buy clothes for us, take us on picnics, and so on. However, there are people here in town who used to live here too, who feel bitter and resentment about working on Hancock Point. It made them feel inferior or like servants. And to be honest, I did, when I was growing up, feel like a servant, or at least different, but I never really felt inferior. And when I look at my life overall, I would have to say that my association with the summer people has greatly enhanced my life.
And of course our dances, I think you should ask me that. We'd have a dance up there in the hall, and by 5 o'clock at night I was wanting my supper so I could get down there. And around 8 o'clock that night, there used to be young people come up from the point, and they look in the door. I'm going to tell this. They look in the door, much to say, "Where are they?" "Oh yes, they're over there." "Well, we'll go over here," and they always stayed over there. And I don't think they ever went on a country dance because they had to swing with us. Now I told Lansing Hammond that, and he laughed. It's so hard, and he said, "You know, we was dying to dance with your girls, but we've been Evans, Crabtree, and Howard Young, and some of them would give us a poke in the back, an elbow in the back." And I think you'll know what I'm talking about there. These people down here were college, and they traveled a great deal, and that was interesting when we ever heard them talk. In later years, why, of course, I appreciated that.
My years here in the post office were very happy years. I never missed a day. I was here every day. And we had weather like we're having now, beautiful sunny days, and we had rainy days. But they always came for their mail in the morning and their evening mail. And if the people missed picking up their evening mail, many of them would leave a message for me to deliver it. So on my way home, I would go to a cottage or 2 or 3 and leave their morning mail and their evening mail. Well, it seemed strange that we too were in the poultry business, and we sold eggs and chickens. So many a Saturday evening, after I had delivered their mail to the front door, I appeared at their back door with eggs and chickens. And they call out, "Is that you, Sylvia? Well, can't you come in a minute?" Well, I didn't have too much time, but my acquaintanceship with them was one that was strong. I was very fond of all of them. And as the years went on, and I was involved with the American Red Cross for 44 years, I had the privilege of asking 2 of our former ambassadors of Hancock Point if they would help write the Red Cross letter, which they have, and one of them has retired from that, but the other one is very active. And the town of Hancock has made their quota every year. But it is due to a letter being sent out to all these people and telling them of all the happenings of the past summer, all the plans for the next year. And these are the things that have brought a close association between, I feel, the town people and the summer people.
It seems to me that I've always been aware of Hancock Point. My earliest recollection is probably of admiring the pretty dresses and the tans of the young girls who used to come to church at the corner before the chapel services began. And I admired them and thought that there was a certain self-assuredness that they had that I admired and envied. And of course, we never thought of going out to get suntans. We were busy, but they always had suntans and always looked so very nice. At 13, I started working at Hancock Point. I worked as a second maid in a family that summer. I learned a lot. I enjoyed it. I was lonely. It was a big house, and I was the only young person there. But everybody was very gracious. I knew that I was an employee, but I never felt a servant, certainly. I remember being paid $10 a week, and that was a good wage at that time for a 13-year-old.
It was, if it wasn't for the summer residents, I probably would have never had the chance to learn to sail, learn to play tennis, and learn to socialize with these people who rounded their R's a lot and had a difficult job saying, "Hey,
I, as a child, was only here twice, once when I was 7 and again when I was 14. And I made the journey here from California. Whether or not that in some way prejudiced my view or gave me the lenses that I saw through, I don't know for sure. But I recall always having a feeling that there was a very distinct gap between the people living at the point and the people who lived beyond Lounder Corner. I suppose at times I wondered why there weren't pillars put up there with gates that really made it quite clear that you were leaving Hancock and you were entering Hancock Point. Maybe because I was a kid from Southern California and really lived across the tracks, on the right side of the tracks, so to speak, and saw the life of blacks and the Japanese and Mexicans in Pasadena, I saw a real relationship between their position in the culture out there, or the society out there, and the way I perceived the local people here, the people who lived here, whose land this truly was, I thought, in the lives of the summer people.
I think what sums up the whole relationship of the two communities best to me is what's happened with the two churches. Not that this is an extremely religious community as it probably was in the 19th century, but the church is a point of meeting for a lot of people. And over the years, this very nice custom grew up of having the Hancock Point Chapel come and have a joint service at Hancock Corner on the last Sunday in July, and to have the Hancock community go to the chapel for the last service on the last Sunday in August. And when both these services take place, there is no division between year-round people and summer people. Everybody is the same, and I think it makes everybody very, very comfortable. It's really like inviting a friend to your home whom you know and whom you love, and not some stranger whom you have to tolerate because it's the right thing to do.
Only a few cinders remain on the original roadbed of the Bar Harbor Express, which stopped running to Hancock Point in 1931 and was followed by the coastal steamers a few years later. The era of grand summer living was fast disappearing, and the automobile was dramatically altering the way Americans lived. Only a few of the original summer people at Hancock Point remained, and it was left to their children, their grandchildren, and a few new people to carry on the summer tradition. Then the Second World War drew most of the young men away from their summer homes, and the scarcity of gasoline returned the point to an unaccustomed isolation. But interesting activity continued there, some of it strikingly new. In 1942, the great conductor Pierre Monteur founded a summer music school for conductors at Hancock, which was the ancestral home of his wife, Doris. Using Hancock and the Domain School as home base, Monteur continued to travel worldwide for performances. He returned each summer to greet a new group of aspiring conductors and to organize a summer orchestra which presented frequent performances. These concerts became enormously popular and influenced some local residents who had little previous exposure to classical music.
The Domain School, when at first we all from the point went up and backed it. We went every Sunday. We were so concert-minded we were almost cultured. Why, there were people down here who knew when to laugh in the middle of a concerto. And pretty soon the people up at the corner who were found a new way of earning money, which was to put the people up at Doris Monteur's prices. They changed, from my point of view, they changed the people of the area from simple, picnic-loving, they still love picnics, but they're much more sophisticated, into people who thought you had to have wine at dinner. The good old country meal that you smelled from a mile away was still there, but it was spoiled a little bit by the fact that men and women had begun having, instead of tea, the happy hour. And after the happy hour, you drank wine through the meal, and that was new. And that has changed.
Quite a bit, and I was very fortunate to play in the Montour Orchestra for 2 summers, and played the concerts. And I think one of my biggest thrills was one concert we did. Pierre Montour himself conducted the Egmont Overture, and that was, I'll never forget it. It was quite a thrill. And of course, then
Montour continued the school until his death in 1964. During its years of operation, the Domain School attracted musicians from many countries. Some of its students became first-rate conductors and soloists. Several have continued to return to Hancock in summer, adding their talents to the rich mixture of the community.
We got to know a good many of the native population and liked them very much. We got to be really good friends. But that wasn't the pervading social atmosphere among the old professors and everything, you know. They didn't mix too much or want to. I didn't feel that way at all. Some of them became my best friends before I knew nearly as intimately most of the summer colony. The Passamaquoddies had a big black powerboat full of baskets, sweetgrass baskets and things. And that was kind of an event, because they'd come in, anchor right off here and row ashore, and then take their big baskets full of their baskets and go from door to door all over the point. So for a while, up until the 30s and possibly 40s, we had more damn Indian baskets floating around this house that you could shake a stick at. And they were the same people every year, really a family thing. And they made beautiful baskets, as you probably know. And then I can't remember the year we had our first Hancock Point circus, but everybody on the point was involved in that. Daisy Ann's and old-fashioned clothes sitting on a buckboard, and this parade went all the way around the place. And we went to the field where we had clowns and bareback riders and all this kind of stuff going on. It was a lot of fun.
The story of Hancock and its relation to Hancock Point is unique in Maine. Here was a small coastal community engrossed in dairy farming, strawberry growing, and some shipbuilding, especially of mackerel schooners. Then, in only a few years, a steady, pleasant invasion began on the broad peninsula of Hancock Point. Summer people, rusticators, city slickers came, with the money to buy up the seaward face of the land. They hired local women to clean, to cook, to care for their children. They sought local men to ply the skills of carpenters, masons, plumbers, caretakers, liverymen, captains. Local life changed for these self-reliant farmers and sailors to meet the Point's needs and to carry on the local commerce of a busy rail and steamer terminus. This invasion of new people, new ideas, new money, and irreversible local change came generations before the similar but much broader statewide change of today's Maine. So the Point became and stayed a thoughtful, rustic retreat for people from away, who soon became a part of the community, if only for a season each year. As the years passed, the summer community has widened, extending from the Point to the ferry and now to Route 1. With their tenure, the land has been reclaimed by the spruce woods as the former fields have shrunk with each passing season. Our seasonal neighbors have greatly enriched the tax base of the town, giving all of us better services and broader options. More important and lasting, perhaps, they have enriched the minds and culture of the town and brought lasting change.
Perhaps one challenge I hadn't counted on was trying to become acclimated to the ways of the Maine society and the I guess, the vast cultural differences. There seems to be two societies here, a coastal summer community, which has been very supportive of us, and then a year-round community, which has also been supportive, but has taken some cultivation on our part in terms of developing that clientele. I was, unfortunately, the first couple of years, I didn't stay here during the winter. I think it required then that I took longer, or perhaps caused me to take longer to become socialized, one might say, to the year-round population. My acceptance took a little longer than one might have thought it would. However, now that I'm a year-round person here, I'm finding that the support being given to us by year-round people is increasing.
I started in the sailing program when I was 10 years old through a scholarship from the Women's Club. I was the only kid from town then, kind of outnumbered by all the summer kids. They accepted me pretty well. Just after a while, I was just another kid, and I made a lot of good friends down here. I'm glad to see now that there are a lot more kids from town taking it. It's been 10 years or so since I was down here much. I don't sail anymore. I miss that. But it was really a good experience.
My first year in the sailing program was when I was 10 years old. After many years of waiting to become of age, my brother had been in it and my dad had been really involved with it. And when I first began, there was very few Hancock kids at all. And as years go on, there's been more and more due to the Hancock Women's Club. And they've given out a lot more scholarships. And there's been no problem at all with the two different groups. They've totally blended together and they're really good friends with each other. And it really opens up a lot of doors for each of the kids. And I found that even though the Hancock kids live in Hancock, and they live right near the bay, they really haven't been out on it, really. And it offers a great opportunity for them to get out there and see what it's really like, and a lot of them enjoy it.
I started the sailing program when I was 11 years old, and I took it for 4 years, and I learned everything I needed to know. So last year, they hired me as assistant sailing master, and when I first started, the sailing master back then was a guy named Edward Bowditch, and he was the greatest guy and he was from Philadelphia. And he sort of got me into the sailing and the summer kids, and I was just accepted then. I didn't really need to be accepted. They just treated me as an equal, and I had a great time down here. And
the point has changed as the years have changed America. The old ways of gracious living are largely faded. The original scholars are long dead. The teeming rail yards, the private train cars, the grand summer hotels, the livery stables, and the steamers are only shadows in the attic of our collective memory. But what remains is a beautiful place, with people who love it and who will continue to care for it, and, across time and space, incidents and people whose 100 summers together have touched many lives and made them better.
Thank you.